Welcome to the motherfucking relay where we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, now it's time for our weekend recap. I went 3 for 4 with my predictions this weekend. You know, I figured that Shakur Stevenson, he was going to win that WBO title. I was very confident in that. Just as well, I was confident that Lee Selby would make his way past Ricky Burns. In regards to Derek Chisora and David Price, I so decided to go with Derek because, you know, Derek is an interesting figure in what is today's heavyweight landscape. Let's talk about this fight, the fight between Derek Chisora and David Price. This was a fight that ahead of the fight, you could have made an argument for either guy because even though David Price doesn't take the best punch, he does certainly pack one of his own. Just as well, Derek Chisora is a physically imposing, aggressive fighter that is likely to draw David Price out into a war, and once he does, you know, David Price's inability to take a hard shot, that's going to come into play. So I decided to go with Derek Chisora by way of knockout or technical knockout on that premise, and Derek just so happened to have proved me right. He very much stayed in character as I expected him to, on that front foot, being aggressive, letting his hands go, throwing overhand rights, and forcing David Price into uncomfortable situations. He scored a knockdown in this fight, and in the fourth, you know, David Price's corner so decided to throw in the towel, hang it up. You see where this is going. You see what direction this fight is headed. There's no sense in David going out there and getting pummeled more than necessary. It was crystal clear what was about to happen to David Price. And this more or less characterizes what I mean when I say that Derek Chisora is a very interesting figure in what is today's heavyweight division. It being that, you know, you don't give him very good odds to beat one of the guys that got belts. You know, you don't give him very good odds to beat one of the champions or those upper echelon guys, which is a very short list. You may not give Derek very good odds to beat those guys, but for all these other guys, you know, beneath that upper echelon, for all these up-and-comers, these young contenders, for all these other guys that are out there that don't comprise the upper echelon of what is today's heavyweight division, Derek Chisora is very much a threat, he's very much a handful, and in many ways, he's this generation's Burt Cooper, this generation's Ray Mercer, that win or lose, this guy's gonna push you, this guy's gonna test you. Derek has a professional record of 32 wins, 9 losses, and 3 of those losses came by way of knockout. At this point in most fighters' careers, they're just faded husks of what they used to be, whereas Derek Chisora seems to have breathed new life, reinvigorated his career, because he's still able to go out there and put on these kinds of performance. And a Derek Chisora would be a fantastic litmus test for the likes of a Otto Valine, a Hrgovic, a Tony Yoka, a Daniel Dubois, these kinds of fighters who are amassing a buzz of their own, but they really haven't been tested at the world level. And a guy like Derek Chisora, a crowd pleaser like Derek Chisora, he's very much in that conversation. He's a guy who goes out there, lays it all on the line, and he fights like he's got nothing to lose. And, you know, yeah, that's a dangerous game. You know, when you go looking for a knockout, you're running the risks of being knocked out. But, you know, for Derek, at least right now, it's working for him. So congratulations to Derek Chisora for living up to my expectations and racking up yet another titillating knockout. Let's see where he goes from here. We then come to the main event of that same card, the World Boxing Super Series final in the 140-pound division, the unification match between what was then the WBA champion Regis Prograis against the IBF champion Josh Taylor. Ladies and gentlemen, I crapped out in this one. I did. You know, I decided to go with Regis Prograis winning the fight on points, and that's not exactly how things worked out.
It's not.
I did envision the fight going to the cards. I did envision the fight going to a decision.
On 12 rounds.
As both of these guys are punchers, you know, and when you get 2 punchers in the ring, 2 guys who can really crack, sometimes they give each other enough respect.
Just enough.
That it affects their implementation. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about how Josh Taylor won this fight. I want to preface everything I'm going to say with this. As far as what I had on my scorecard, I had this thing 6 rounds to 6. At the end of the 12th, I had it 6 rounds even for both guys.
For Regis and Josh.
But I have no issue with the judges' scorecards. I have no issue with the judges' decision because there are some tidbits that really characterize the argument as to why Josh Taylor may have won this fight, why Josh Taylor was the ring general more so than Regis Prograis. Frankly, Regis isn't complaining about it, so I don't think his fans should be either. Regis took no issue. You know, he says the right man won the fight, and, you know, I agree with that. I think Josh Taylor, he did enough that, yeah, it was close, it was competitive, it was action-packed, but it really does look like, yeah, the right man won the fight. Josh definitely won the fight. No controversy, no complaints. In terms of implementation, I want to say that Josh Taylor lived up to my expectations. He lived up to my expectations in the sense that I expected him to go in there and be aggressive. I expected him to want to try to get inside of Regis's wheelhouse. It's just that I didn't imagine that if he did this, he'd take the punches as well as he did. You know, he was playing Regis Prograis very close to the chest. A very risky strategy, because in doing so, you're running the risk of him unloading on you, using that power of his. That power of his that most other guys really can't stand up to. You know, putting yourself in the line of fire against Regis Prograis is a very risky strategy, but an intelligent strategy on Josh Taylor's part, because he got so deep in the pocket on Regis, so far inside, that he was actually smothering Regis's work, thereby taking something off the punch. He's not giving him enough room, enough real estate to get good leverage for his shots, and in doing so, he's dumbing down Regis's power, then pushing off of him and landing short hooks, short uppercuts deep in the pocket, on the inside. A very risky strategy, but in this situation, very effective. Very effective, though not without its own set of consequences. You see, playing Regis that close to the chest might have dumbed his power down a bit, but it did afford Regis the opportunity to rip shots to Josh Taylor's body continuously. I mean, round after round, this was pretty much the dynamic. This was pretty much the aesthetic. Two guys playing each other very close to the chest, with Regis ripping shots to the body and Josh landing eye-catching uppercuts and hooks upstairs on Regis Prograis. And I think that that's what swayed the judges. I mean, I think that Josh Taylor had the more eye-catching punches in what was a very competitive match. Neither guy was really bullying the other guy, but you have to say that if the fight looked the way that it looked, it really was more due to Josh's strategy and being able to get that close to Regis. That if Josh is playing you that close to the chest, it's not because you want him to, it's because you really can't keep him out. It's more or less the same principle that we saw in the Sean Porter and Errol Spence fight. That, you know, don't believe the hype. Don't believe the fanboys telling you that Errol Spence wanted to beat Sean Porter at his own game. If Sean Porter is that close to you, it's because he wants to be, and you can't keep him out. And in this situation, the same is true with Josh. That if Josh was that close to Regis, it's not because Regis wanted him there. It's because Regis couldn't keep him out. In the realm of signature punches for both fighters, I'd say that Josh Taylor really did the business with his uppercut, a very short uppercut deep in the pocket. And for Regis, you know, yeah, there were plenty of shots to the body, plenty of shots downstairs, but if he had a really eye-catching punch, I'd have to say it was Regis's jab. Whenever he could get some space between him and Josh, whenever he was afforded this opportunity in spots, the jab was there for Regis Prograis. It's just that that jab wasn't enough to keep Josh out of his wheelhouse. But he did snap Josh's head back a couple of times with it. He certainly did. Now, this fight was a genuine barn burner, a real shootout between two shooters, two punchers, you know, two guys who are accustomed to getting a lot of respect from the man opposite the ring. And both of them, you know, they just let the fists fly. I'll say that I still think that Regis is every bit the monstrous puncher that he was perceived as being ahead of this fight. But a bit of strategy from Josh allowed Josh to contend. That he got so deep in the pocket on Regis, Regis couldn't muster up the same kind of concussive power he normally does. And that's because a lot of other guys, they give him that respect. They give him that room, that real estate to generate the kind of torque, the kind of leverage that makes him a monstrous puncher. But in the case of Josh, you know, Josh wanted to go for it. Josh wasn't going to play him cautiously. He wanted to put on a show, and that's very much what he did. So much so that Regis struggled to get off a good, clean punch up top, a good, clean headshot on Josh Taylor. If Regis accumulated any kind of damage to Josh Taylor's face, it really was later in the fight. You know, after these guys have been going to war, you know, that massive whelp over the eye of Josh Taylor, that didn't happen till what?
Later in the fight.
Last 3 rounds or something like that? So while I definitely got this prediction wrong, I'm not disappointed, because overall it was a fantastic fight. It really was the best versus the best. And this is the kind of fight that you get when the best are fighting the best. When you got 2 world champions, 2 of the very best fighters in a given weight class, who are willing to lay it all out on the line against each other. This is the kind of matchup you get. Matchups like this. Matchups like Bostic versus Beterbiev. I mean, the boxing gods have really been kind to the boxing fans the last couple of weeks, and there's more to come. You know, we still got Canelo versus Kovalev. We still got Joshua versus Ruiz, too. I mean, there's a lot to look forward to, but also a lot to be thankful for and a lot to reflect upon. I mean, given what both guys put forth, you found out something new about each one of these two fighters, that Josh Taylor can maintain a feverish pace throughout the course of a 12-round fight without really taking his foot off the gas. And this is something that I feel Regis struggled with, because he's accustomed to getting more respect in the ring from his opponents. He's not accustomed to being in there with a guy who's going to push the pace on him. You know, Regis is used to going in there and dispatching a guy before the 12th round rolls around, whereas here, you know, you got a guy, he's not afraid of you, he's not afraid of your power, he's taking your punches well, and he's landing some of his own. I mean, I think that that's really what tilted the scales a bit for Josh Taylor, that they were fighting at a pace that was more or less being set by Josh as opposed to Regis. However, Regis has got nothing to be ashamed of, because he put on a fantastic performance himself. This wasn't a shutout by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, on my card, I reiterate, I had this thing a draw. I had it 6 rounds even by the end of the 12th, with Regis picking up the 11th and 12th rounds. And I'll say that even though Regis may have lost this fight by a hair, not by much, but even though he lost this fight, I think he won himself a lot of fans with his performance, with what he put forth, and how gracious he was in defeat. And I can totally see Regis Prograis bouncing back from this. I dare say I can even see him becoming a world champion yet again, sometime in the not-so-far-off future. It's entirely possible, because he lost this fight, but he didn't lose it by much, you know? Now, when it comes to Josh Taylor, the newly crowned WBA, IBF, and Ring Magazine champion, wielder of the coveted Ali Trophy from the World Boxing Super Series in the 140-pound division, for Josh Taylor, he's put the entire division on notice, oh yeah, but one guy in particular, one guy that goes by the name of Jose Ramirez, the only other unified champion at the weight. And with this fight, with having defeated the undefeated Ivan Bedincik, IBF champion, having defeated the undefeated Regis Prograis, WBA champion, Josh Taylor is now integrated into the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list in the number 10 spot, effectively bumping off Julian Williams, the unified champion, at 154 pounds. And we discussed this already as to what the rhyme and the reason for that is. For those interested, I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. As far as what's next for Josh Taylor, what can we expect to see him doing next? Well, he quickly took to calling out Jose Ramirez, who's in possession of the only other 2 world titles at the weight. The fight between them would be for the undisputed super lightweight championship. And Jose Ramirez, he has responded. He says that the Lord has a plan for everyone, and God willing, his plan is to become the undisputed champion at the weight. Thus, the only way for you to do that is to square off against the other only unified champion at the weight. Now, Josh Taylor. How soon can we expect to see this? Well, it's conceivable that Jose Ramirez's very next opponent is going to be Victor Postol, who happens to be the mandatory challenger for what is the WBC title, the green belt. So you'd have to put the fight between Jose and Josh at least 2 fights out, at least 2 fights from now, that it's conceivable we'll see Jose Ramirez one more time before he fights Josh, and just as well, we might see Josh one more time in action before we see him fight Jose Ramirez. I could see it happening that way. I'd put the unification match 2 to 3 fights from now, yeah, it could happen that way. But let's be honest with ourselves, people. No other match, no other fight, no other endeavor for either Josh Taylor or Jose Ramirez makes more sense than a fight between each other, than a fight between the two. Top Rank and Matchroom, they have worked together before. I mention Matchroom because, you know, in all likelihood, Josh Taylor gets signed to Matchroom. In all likelihood, I could very much see that happening. You know, him entering some kind of a multi-fight commitment to Matchroom, to Eddie Hearn. It could happen that way. It's just as possible that he ends up on the Top Rank side of things. We really don't know right now. But in any event, if that's the case, if both guys end up on opposite sides of the street, well, those two outfits have a better working relationship with each other than some others. Matchroom has worked with Top Rank plenty of times to make plenty of fights, and this would likely be another. Because, I reiterate, there's no better matchup for either Josh Taylor or Jose Ramirez than for them to fight each other. No other fight makes any kind of goddamn sense. more than that one.
Not for them.
Not for those two guys. The matchup itself is a fascinating matchup because in that matchup, much like this one, you'd be pitting two shooters, two punchers, two high-octane fighters against each other that also just so happen to have the same sweet spot. Jose Ramirez is a mid-range to inside fighter in all the ways that Josh Taylor is a mid-range to inside fighter in all the ways that Regis Prograis is a mid-range to inside fighter. It's a very similar situation in that respect, that the whole time you're in the ring with Jose Ramirez, he's trying to get close to you. He's trying to get close to you, fight you in close quarters, and rip devastating shots to the body. In turn, we see what Josh Taylor just did. We see what Regis Prograis just did, you know. These are close quarters fighters. So a fight between Josh and Jose has
The same chance.
the same probability of being a high-octane firefight that the fight between Josh and Regis was. The difference, however, being that Jose Ramirez isn't going to be the smaller guy in the ring the way that Regis was. You know, you could see that in terms of Regis and Josh, Josh had the more generous physical dimensions. He was the more statuesque fighter in the fight, standing in at about 5'10", to Regis, who, I don't know, he's about, 5'7", 5'8". With Jose, that really wouldn't be the case. With Jose, Josh would be eye level with the man opposite the ring of him. Jose Ramirez is not small for the 140-pound division. He's not small for the weight, and he's a pressure fighter. This guy's going to stay on you the whole time, that relentless pace. You wonder which one of the two would get to fight their fight. Would Josh Taylor succumb to the relentless pressure fighting of Jose Ramirez, or
Would he beat him at his own
would
game?
it be the other way around? Would Josh Taylor prove himself to be the better man at that range, the better fighter in what could be a phone booth fight? Because, I mean, if this fight with Regis was anything, that's what it was. It was a phone booth fight. It was a close quarters brawl. And with Jose Ramirez, well, that fight has the same potential to become that as well. Jose Ramirez, he's not some outside fighter. He's not going to try to pick you long distance. The whole time you're in there with him, he's trying to get close to you. But so is Josh. The other intangible that you have to factor in is that both of these guys have proven they can take a punch. Josh Taylor has been in there with two of the more sizable punchers in the 140-pound division, Ivan Bedenchik and Regis Prograis. But the same can be said of Jose Ramirez, who took some very hard shots from Maurice Hooker before stopping him. Both of these guys, they got chins. They can take a shot and keep on coming. So look, I don't want to sound like a broken record here, but a Jose Ramirez versus Josh Taylor fight is just as much a 50-50 fight, just as much a pick'em fight as this Regis Prograis fight was. Oh, I know that people made up their minds. I know that people made their decisions, but the bookies did have it as a close to even fight. You know, the bookies did have this at close to even money, and the boxing community was split smack dab down the middle as far as who they thought would win this thing. And I'm looking at this Jose Ramirez fight, and I see that the same elements are in play. That fight has the potential to be just as much of a pick'em fight as yesterday's fight was. So we'll see what happens. We'll see how the cookie crumbles.